Chapter 6. Making Ends Meet. I was barely making ends meet with the rent on my first place. It swallowed almost all of my salary, but that was okay because I had finally gotten away from my stepdad. I found myself a small, slightly weather-beaten cottage not too far from Carlisle. It was really small, desperately needed a new coat of paint, and came with a neighbour who couldn't help but keep tabs on me. Plus, it had an outhouse. At first, I found the whole setup kind of amusing. I was friendly to the lady next door despite her knowing my entire menu for the day. Even making trips to the outdoor toilet had its charm initially. Then winter hit. In Cumbria, winter means a harsh, constant northeasterly wind that comes hurtling down from the hills. They call it the Helm wind, and it's tough even under the best conditions. It's absolutely no joke when it brings snow that blocks your way to the toilet. During one especially harsh cold snap, I found myself thinking a lot about my dad. He'd been gone for ages, but we kept in sparse contact. Every so often I'd get a letter or a rare phone call. He'd tell me how wonderful life was on the other side of the globe, how the sun was always out and his career was flourishing. He said the move had transformed his life and suggested it could be a game-changer for me too. Now that I had severed ties with my stepdad, I was open to the idea. After saving every penny from endless hours at the bakery and feeling utterly spent from the work, it seemed like the right time to leap at this chance. My mom, predictably, wasn't thrilled. She warned me about trusting him, but, in his absence, I'd put him on a pedestal. "He's my dad," I countered, and she eventually dropped her objections. Just before Christmas that year, I booked a flight to Christchurch, New Zealand, secretly hoping I wouldn't be coming back. My plan was to live with my dad, work with him, and support him in his older years. I was ready to leave our troubled history behind as the plane landed. "Finally, so great to see you." Dad was there to greet me as I stepped into the arrivals hall. He looked well, his skin tanned from his new lifestyle. He was upbeat and kept saying during the drive back how this was going to be a great new chapter for both of us. After a few days, I realized I had made a big mistake. I had hoped for at least a lukewarm welcome from my stepmother since we hadn't really connected, but the warning signs came quickly. That first night, Dad offered me a drink. I accepted, noticing how eagerly he drank his own. I hoped it was just a one-off, a special occasion to celebrate reuniting. However, the next morning, Dad left for work, finding my abrupt exit the night's main spectacle. Despite the morning's clarity, I was resolute. Paramount was my inability to endure his drinking habits anymore. "I'll quit," he pledged, gesturing earnestly. "From now on, it's just orange juice for me." But his promises sounded empty, and his recognition of this led him to leave in exasperation, leaving me to request a ride to the airport from my friends. My belongings were still at my dad's, but I had no desire to return. After a lengthy drive to attend the party, all I yearned for was to fly back home. Dressed simply in board shorts, a shirt and sandals, with just my passport and wallet on me, I secured a last-minute flight after a call. The airport was close by, so I asked my friends for a direct ride there. I raced to my gate, just in time to catch my flight, embarking on a new chapter. As soon as I buckled up and closed my eyes while the plane took off, I was certain I'd never come back. I started this journey full of hope, only to end it feeling more isolated than ever. My father was a stranger to me, his affection for alcohol eclipsing everything else. Yet I refused to let this episode pull me down. I was adamant that something good must emerge from it. I decided during that lengthy flight that if I was going to succeed in life, it was up to me to make it happen. Once back in Cumbria, I wrote a letter to my dad explaining my reasons for not returning and concluded with, "We are two different people, and I'm so sorry you'll never know the real me." That line was meant to mark the end of our relationship, but the drunken phone call I received from him in response only cemented it. He was slurring, struggling to put sentences together while trying to assure me everything was going to be fine. I calmly and politely cut him off mid-sentence, telling him I had to hang up. After coming back from New Zealand, I made a few significant choices in quick succession. First, I quit drinking, having seen what it did to my dad and not wanting to mimic that path in any way. Then I snagged a driving gig with an agricultural supplier. Besides being a regular 9-to-5 job, it also involved a bit of salesmanship. Having enjoyed my time serving customers at the butcher's, this job seemed like a perfect blend of driving and interacting with people. Soon I found myself delivering goods across the Lake District, forming business connections with farmers. It was demanding work but kept me in great shape and was incredibly enjoyable and confidence-boosting. With the job change came the chance to move out of the cottage. I was fed up with the outdoor toilet and the nosy neighbour. Rumour. Had it that a flat was opening up for rent at a grand lodge house northeast of Carlisle, owned by a local landowner named Kevin and his family. I knew Kevin from business with the local farmers. When I visited to check if the flat was still available, I was taken with the place even before I knocked. Set back from the road, with large grounds and broad views of the countryside, it felt right. Would £12 a week be okay? Kevin's wife inquired after we talked, and she discovered her husband was a client of where I worked. I agreed to her proposal, and then she mentioned that her husband could use some assistance with the property upkeep in exchange for lower rent. "I'll pay you £3 an hour to mow the lawn," she offered, as she showed me the equipment in the sheds I'd be using. The moment I saw the ride-on mower, I was convinced this was where I belonged. It turned out to be the simplest and most satisfying task I've ever undertaken. The property was large enough that I could cover my rent just by mowing the lawn once a week. Moreover, I found the lodge life to be incredibly enjoyable. I appreciated the open space and tranquility. It quickly felt like home to me. It was Kevin who became my mentor. With his snow-white hair and face weathered from outdoor life, it was clear he was no stranger to the wilderness. I instantly felt a connection with him. A true outdoorsman, he showed generosity and enthusiasm for forest conservation. As his new housemate, I eagerly learned from him. I joined Kevin on his walks, assisted in planting young trees and clearing the underbrush. He taught me which trees prospered together and worked on creating new woodlands for the enjoyment of future generations. As I gained knowledge, he entrusted me with more responsibilities, from trapping eels to protecting the nests of other birds from magpies, until nearly all of my free time was spent working by his side. We planted numerous trees across his properties. It wasn't work in the traditional sense. It was our mutual appreciation for nature and the countryside. His wife, Lucy, and their grown children came to see me as part of the family. They became the family I never had. I like to believe we chose each other. Kevin was a remarkable man, and I came to view him as a father figure. Even though I had my own apartment and independence, he often invited me over for meals, like fish and chips, making me feel even more at home. Combined with my sales job to farmers, this gave me a solid base at last. My contentment and love for rural life flourished. It also presented me with the opportunity to pay it forward, which led to David entering my life. For a drive in the Land Rover. I'd let him out in a large field and drive around the edge while he ran alongside, brimming with enthusiasm, though it hardly tired him out. If anything, he seemed to gain endurance from the exercise. Growing up meant embracing life with the Cumberlands, with David playing a central role. Regardless of the weather, spending a day on the moors and returning to a warm flat with David drying off in front of a log fire was a joy. David was my constant companion outside of work, and when I was on the road, he stayed with Kevin and his family, occasionally joining me, which always brought me happiness. Over the years, I became adept at selling a wide range of products to my customers, including animal feed, hardware, and durable clothing, always aiming to surpass my sales targets. My dedication eventually caught the eye of a competing agricultural supplier, who made me an offer that was difficult to resist, including a higher salary and a company car. However, the new position required relocating to West Cumbria, a move that would mean leaving behind my cherished life with the Cumberlands. Despite my growing ambition, this potential change tugged at my heartstrings. Investing effort into the property had really paid off for me, and I guess I just wanted to show myself that I was not the same scared kid who always tried to steer clear of those who were meant to look out for me. So I accepted the offer, lured by the promise of a company car and a salary increase, and it wasn't long after the move that I started questioning my choice. David was with me, yet everything felt too different. I bought my first place, a half of a house in a town named Deerham. It was pleasant, yet it seemed miles away from what I was used to. Despite the beautiful coast nearby, I felt lost and somewhat trapped in a home that started to bring back memories of my dad's place beneath the railway bridge. What made it tougher was not being able to take David with me to work. Instead, I had to depend on the goodwill of neighbours to watch over him during the day. I gave my all to succeed in the job, mainly because I couldn't face the thought that I might have turned my back on a life that was so important to me. Whenever we could, we'd visit the Cumberlands. David would be over the moon seeing Kevin and his family, and it was wonderful to spend time with my friend and guide. On our walks, we'd see the expanding forest we'd helped plant years ago. There was something truly magical about that, stirring a longing for my past days spent on the fells. Sometimes I'd spend the weekend and catch up with friends on a Saturday night. On one occasion, we went to a nearby village for a drink. The place was always buzzing. That night, a lively young woman named Susie with a playful smile caught my attention. A nail stylist running her business from her place, she was all about chatting and laughing, a real social butterfly. Surprisingly, she seemed interested in my story. Despite my timidity, there was something about Susie's vitality that I couldn't help but admire. After a few drinks, we planned to meet up again the following weekend. I was genuinely fond of her. Strangely, I had this deep feeling that she'd end up being my wife. Even before heading back for another week of work, I was already looking forward to our date. Then, suddenly, David fell sick, and all I could concentrate on was the day ahead. Chapter 8. Sick as a dog. It started when David turned his nose up at his breakfast. After ignoring his dinner too, I called the vet and booked the first appointment I could. After an examination, they decided to keep an eye on him for a week. But David hardly ate anything during that time. We went back for a scan, and the vet suggested a minor surgery just to check things out. "It's just to be cautious," he assured me. "We want to make sure everything's okay." I left David with the vet before heading to work, trying not to make a big deal about it so he wouldn't stress. I planned to leave work early and bring him home so he could rest comfortably. So, when my phone rang around noon, I was already thinking about heading out. "Mr. Jones?" I immediately knew it was the vet, and wondered why he was calling instead of the nurse. He hesitated before speaking. "Brandon, please know we would have done anything to save David." "What?" I was lagging behind every word he said next. He told me that they discovered David had advanced cancer during the surgery. It was too far gone to treat. The Kindestoption, he explained, was to euthanize him. I got it, I really did, but it crushed me. David had been with me for 9 years. It felt like losing a close friend. Worse yet, I didn't get the chance to say goodbye. That made the grieving process incredibly tough. I kept burying my feelings like I always did, even with the sadness of losing David. I returned to work quieter than usual, but no one could see the pain inside. Coming home to an empty house was unbearable. Everywhere I looked reminded me of David, yet he wasn't there. In the weeks following his passing, I resolved never to get another dog. The bond I had with David was too special, and realizing how much he meant to me only deepened the pain of his loss. Dogs were off the table for me. The heartache was too much to bear. Even though I kept my emotions hidden, I felt the need to open up to Susie. She seemed understanding, and yet I didn't let it overshadow our time together. Susie didn't come from a pet-owning family. She had never experienced the companionship of a dog. Not once had a pet ever been inside their home, to be honest. So, during our times together, I concentrated on making the most out of our moments instead of pondering over past events. As our connection grew deeper with time, it aided me in moving forward. Susie was aware of how important David had been in my life, yet by then we had both fallen in love and were making plans for our future. David was never forgotten, and our connection remained special, but Susie seemed to come into my life exactly when needed most. In 1998, Susie and I were married. I also landed a new job which enabled me to sell my old house and move back across the lakes to be with my new wife. Living in a market town nestled among the fells, with views stretching southwest over Derwentwater Lake towards the forest-covered hills, felt like entering another realm. Susie had been a lifelong resident there, and I quickly felt at home as well. With the drastic changes in elevation from the lake shore up to the mountain peaks, the weather could shift dramatically throughout a single day. Storm clouds might roll in rapidly, only to split open moments later, allowing beams of sunlight to pierce through. When it rained, the water would cascade down, driven by winds that were shaped by the landscape surrounding us. Seen through my eyes, as a blissful newlywed, it appeared there was no place quite like it, nowhere else I'd rather be. Lacking David's companionship, who adored country strolls, I sought reasons to step outside. I continued to enjoy the outdoor life, though it often wasn't the same without Susie, who was occupied with her career. A friend introduced me to mountain biking, and it seemed like a fantastic way to enjoy the surroundings. Soon enough, with forests and trails a mere bike ride from our doorstep, I grew fond of biking. It turned out to be an excellent way to meet new friends, I found. Before long, I had formed a new group of friends who shared this interest. Furthermore, it served as an ideal way to de-stress from work as I progressed in my career in agricultural sales. For someone who had always battled with self-confidence, my ambition was unmatched. I transitioned between companies, ascending in rank and responsibility, handling increasingly larger budgets. In the process of chasing the best deals, I developed a somewhat ruthless edge. However, it didn't come naturally to me. It was simply part of what I had to embrace to excel in my work. At day's end, I'd return to an empty home feeling exhausted. Instead of waiting for Susie, I'd hop on my bike immediately. I became one of those work hard, play hard individuals, and honestly, I flourished under the pressure and the release from it. Even if my wife was there when I returned, I'd itch to get going again. "How about a stroll by the lake?" she'd offer. "Sounds nice," I'd lie through a smile. "Should I cycle before or after?" "Why not now?" she'd suggest, and off we'd go, me hurrying us along so I could get back to my bike and relax. As time went on and my job responsibilities increased, I found myself overseeing sales across the country. I was stuck at a desk in a Heysham company, commuting by car for 2 hours every day. It was draining but never dampened my enthusiasm for hitting the bike trails whenever possible. Maybe it was sparked by losing a close friend, but mountain biking gave me a different kind of fulfillment. I'd arrive home, muddy but smiling. Susie would send me straight to the shower, and joining her afterward, I'd feel clean, worn out, but satisfied. Life was good, even as my passion shifted from mountain to road cycling. Now, instead of 15 miles across a mountain in an hour, I was doing upwards of 40, 50, or even 60 miles at a time. The downside? These sessions could take up most of the day, eating into my weekends. On Saturdays, Susie would drop me off in Carlisle and hit the shops while I biked home, taking a long route back through the west coast of Cumbria and the lakes. I'd return energized, addicted to the adrenaline. I was always analyzing my performance and seeking improvements, mirroring my professional life. Once, during a key sales drive, My boss tried to tell me it was fine to fail now and then. I didn't understand. Why? I countered. Who aims for failure? I'd grown up thinking I wasn't enough to be wanted or loved. Now, with a loving wife, a stimulating career, and my passion for cycling, I had everything. I was intent on making the most of life, unwavering in the face of any threat that might lurk behind me. Now, back at the tent, gazing at Snowdon's Peak in the late afternoon, I'm overjoyed. I'm utterly spent, pushed to my limits. But Buster and I had made it. Lying there, a stick in his mouth, Buster looks up as if to say, "What an adventure!" Indeed, it's been. "The best," I say out loud, as if we're having one of our pretend chats. He's radiating joy and contentment, mirroring exactly how I feel. Yeah, we really did this. With all the planning, the prep, and the nagging doubts about whether I could actually manage it, it hits me that I hadn't thought about what comes after reaching the summit. How getting up the mountain was my sole focus. Yet, looking forward at the daunting journey back home, with its long hours driving on the road, seems overwhelming for my already strained back. We're both worn out, my spine is throbbing, but more than anything, I'm not ready to let this moment go. So, after resting well in our tent, with Buster snug beside me, I decide we'll take a detour west through Scotland. I've heard the coast there is stunning, with its pristine beaches and views of the small islands, and truly, finding a camping spot right across from a wide beach, the scenery is even more breathtaking than I expected. Setting off for a walk along the beach under Buster's watchful eye, it feels like we're the only souls around. The sea is a vivid blue, shimmering in the sunlight. The islands in the distance seem like they could hide treasures, and the waves have left behind a collection of sea-polished gems for Buster. Right away, he picks up a piece of driftwood and carries it as he explores the tide pools. I wish I could walk as easily as he does. My body is still aching from the climb, but that pain no longer feels unbeatable. It doesn't scare me anymore. It doesn't control me. Instead, I walk barefoot, pants rolled up to my knees, close to the water, and let my mind wander. I'm taken back to France, to my childhood, free of worries and oblivious to the difficult times that would follow us back to the UK. Yet, I understand now that those early challenges are in my past. They taught me resilience and led me to discover my passion for the outdoors and dear friendships, like with David. Now, in my 40s, I reflect on the pivotal moments that have shaped me since then, feeling incredibly fortunate. I've faced some dark times, both unexpected and transformative, but with my wife's support and Buster by my side, my guardian and cheerleader, I've made it through as one fortunate man. Chapter 9. My life crashed. The summer of 2007 stretched long and was scorchingly hot across the Lake District. The greenery turned pale as the earth parched, and any hint of a cool breeze was reserved for the peaks of the fells. It was far too warm to be stuck inside a car, commuting. My team was in the thick of preparations for a major presence at an agricultural trade fair, dedicating extra time to ensure our booth would shine, and I pitched in as much as possible to assist them. We had placed an order with a local print shop for marketing materials. Upon receiving the notification that our order was ready, I offered to detour and collect it on my route home. It was a minor deviation, and it offered me the chance to ensure we had all our necessary materials. Traffic during peak hours in the northeast of England mirrors the congestion found globally. Even in these less populated regions, the sheer amount of vehicles guarantees inevitable slowdowns. Nearing Borrowdale, with a cargo of shiny new brochures in the back, I decelerated behind a line of cars at a congested intersection. I was in a company BMW estate, equipped with air conditioning capable of making the sweltering day feel distant. Besides Susie and our bicycles, this car was my treasure. I maintained it meticulously, always vigilant against any scratches or dents. Finding the lead car stationary, I engaged the handbrake and allowed the cool blast from the vents to envelop me. I leaned forward, trying to allow the air to cool the sweat-soaked back of my shirt, all the while keeping an eye on the vehicle ahead for any hint of movement. When the queue finally started to inch forward, my gaze instinctively flicked to the rearview mirror. At that instant, the sight of a rapidly approaching truck's grille, accompanied by the screech of its brakes, dominated my view. The ensuing collision was deafening, as if an explosion had erupted within my car. I was thrust back into my seat and then immediately forward, restrained only by my seatbelt. The force was so severe it triggered the airbag. Gasping for air, shocked by the sudden turn of events, I then settled back into a quiet stillness that had settled over the scene. A lorry had rear-ended me, having miscalculated its stopping distance. Dazed, I extricated myself from the car and stepped out into the day's heat. Miraculously, I hadn't hit the car in front, but my car's rear had just crumpled like paper. "Are you okay?" People were rushing over from their cars to see if I was all right. I can't remember how I answered them. Adrenaline rushed through me, dulling any immediate pain, and it seemed I was miraculously unhurt. My neck was aching, but that was to be expected after such a crash. "I'll make it," I managed to say, as I tried to maneuver my BMW to the roadside to swap information with the truck driver. When I finally got home, in a car that badly needed some fixing on the back end, the gravity of the situation hit me. The BMW, I realized, was the last of my worries. In many ways, it had taken the brunt of the hit for me. The thought hit me hard. The truck could have killed me, I thought, just as Susie came running out, worried sick. I had called to let her know I was in an accident, but told her not to fret. By the time I reached home, she had already called her dad. He was a retired paramedic, tough as they come. "We're going to the hospital," he declared as soon as he saw me. "You need a checkup." "I'm okay," I tried to reassure him. "Really, it's nothing that won't pass." He just pointed to his Ford Focus, wordlessly telling me we were going whether I liked it or not. At the hospital, I felt I had little to tell the doctor. A truck hit me from behind, and now I was starting to feel a backache and headache creeping in. I believed a good sleep was all I needed. However, after his examination, he suggested seeing my doctor the next day, just in case. My father-in-law's stern look made it clear I had no choice in the matter. The next day, I woke up feeling dizzy and nauseous, my upper back screaming in pain. My mind was on work, especially with an important trade show coming up, but it was obvious I was in no shape to go. Guilt washed over me for having to take off, but I knew I'd be useless in this state. "Adrenaline acts as a natural painkiller," my doctor explained after checking me out. "It probably masked the pain right after the accident, but as it wears off, you're likely to feel even worse." She had gently asked me to describe the accident, grimacing as I detailed how I had seen the truck looming behind me in my rearview mirror right before the crash. She believed that such a large vehicle hitting my stationary car must have caused a significant energy transfer, much of which likely went through my spine. The sharp pain I felt when trying to touch my toes seemed to confirm her thoughts. "How long until I recover?" I asked, thinking about work. "You'll need to take it slow," my doctor advised. "Are we talking about a few days here?" "Brandon, I'd say you need a couple of weeks of rest," she replied, surprising me, and began to write a prescription for pain medication. "Make sure you're taking these as needed." Trusting medical advice has always been my way, so with the prescription in hand and a desire to recover quickly, I followed her instructions to the letter. Battling dizziness, nausea, and increasing back spasms, I took an extended sick leave and stayed home for 2 weeks. Sleeping didn't help. Closing my eyes only made me relive the crash. With Susie busy at her beauty salon upstairs, I was left alone with daytime TV. Hearing her cheerful clients only made my isolation in the adjacent living room feel deeper. It was a stark drop from my usual busy life to just being curled up in front of a television, curtains drawn against the day. This inactivity began to eat at me as I saw no improvement day after day. Plans to bike from coast to coast with a friend were indefinitely postponed. Every attempt to move sent shooting pains down my arms and legs, sometimes making me cry out. Standing was barely manageable, each step a cautious shuffle. On top of that, my headaches grew until they were utterly unbearable. "I don't feel any better," I confessed at my next doctor's visit. "If anything, it feels worse." Expressing the extent of my pain was challenging. Every symptom had intensified post-accident. I had initially walked away thinking a bit of rest would do, but now even visiting my local doctor's office was overwhelming. My doctor examined me again and chose to up my dosage of painkillers. Honestly, that did little to ease my suffering. A few weeks ago, I tried going back to work. I felt terrible for leaving my co-workers to manage the trade fair on their own. All I wanted was to sit at my desk again, but as soon as I got to the office, the pain was unbearable. It wasn't long before I had to go back to my doctor to get signed off for a longer period. I felt ashamed going back so many times. Before the accident, I could hardly remember how to get to the local clinic. Now I was a frequent visitor in the waiting area. Even though every doctor I met was compassionate, I kept getting sent home with more and more pills. With summer now behind me, I had lost the energetic, outgoing side of myself. Every day, week, and month brought enduring pain with no relief in sight. I held on to hope for a while, wishing to wake up better one day. Instead, my condition seemed to worsen, and any movement could end in severe pain. As winter came, doing everyday tasks became a challenge. Dressing myself was difficult, as lifting my arms caused intense pain in my neck, and every movement made my bones crack. The medication made my head foggy, starting with codeine, then moving to tramadol, and onto morphine products that made it hard to tell if it was late afternoon or a completely different reality. My mind was in a haze, and my patience was wearing thin. During this time, my wife Susie had to watch me become more and more dependent. Always strong, she did everything possible to support us. She worked extra hours, took on more clients to make up for my lost income, and took care of everything at home. Whenever I came back from the doctor, feeling hopeless about finding a way to get better, she persuaded me to insist on more tests. Susie suggested physiotherapy and even alternative treatments, which brought some relaxation, but the constant ache was draining. By the new year, I felt stuck, physically and emotionally broken, and my spirits were low. Before the mishap and after we lost David, cycling had been my escape. It helped me manage work stress and kept me connected to friends and the world. Now, unable to ride, I missed it terribly. I eventually stopped hoping to join my cycling group again, even though I promised I'd be back soon. Initially, they came over, chatted, and sent their best wishes, but over time, those visits became rare. I guess I wasn't the best company, leaving me more isolated and bitter about my situation. I often told Susie how we used to be the ultimate hosts after a long bike ride. My cycling friends would gather in the kitchen for tea and cake. Yet, here I was, desperate for some companionship, and it felt like they had all but forgotten me. It felt as though life had crumpled me up like a piece of trash, with no sign of things getting better. Dealing with constant pain and a medication routine that clouded my thoughts, I began to fall into a deep hole of despair. Chapter 10. Help me. Susie, Susie, help me. I was crumpled on the bathroom floor. Movement was impossible without inviting another wave of searing pain that had knocked me down as I left the shower. Over time, I'd figured out that raising my arms too high was a bad idea. Yet, even the tiniest twitch could feel as though my spine was being zapped with electricity, which is what happened this time. "What's going on? Brandon?" Susie had hurried from the kitchen when she heard my fall. This wasn't a new scenario. Simple acts like making tea, brushing my teeth, or turning my head at the sound of the phone could trigger an excruciating shutdown. As Susie tried to wrap a robe around me, pain sweated out of me. No matter how softly she tried to help, every movement would make me gasp and wince, feeling as though my muscles were caught in unseen clamps. "I can't stand this anymore," I muttered as she tried to help me stand. I'm not a small man, and Susie, bless her, isn't big. Nonetheless, she bravely supported me each painful step to the car for yet another rush to the hospital since my accident. This time it was a 4-hour wait in the emergency room. The doctor, when I finally saw one, just prescribed more painkillers. Physically, they helped me scrape through the days. Mentally, though, I was crumbling. My thoughts and emotions were muddled, like my brain was wrapped in cloth and my universe shrank. The great outdoors that I loved was out of my reach. I could barely make it to the mailbox, dreading even that. If I needed to be somewhere, I'd drive, but I found myself inventing reasons to stay home. It felt like every path in life was being blocked off. Nearly a year after the mishap, I got a slot for an MRI scan. By then, I'd quit my job since commuting was too painful. My savings were gone, forcing me onto welfare, which was a blow to my pride. It also meant pinching pennies from my tight budget for trips to a hospital far away. I was hanging on to the hope that, finally, something might change. The discovery of some damage during the scan was, paradoxically, a relief. To finding the root of the pain in my neck, knowing there was a physical cause was a bit of a relief. Before, it was like trying to convince people the pain wasn't just in my head. Now there was proof damage to my nerves from an accident was behind the unbearable pain. I eagerly asked the doctor reviewing my scan if there was a way to fix it. He looked concerned and said more tests were needed. Following that, I met different spine experts. Their opinions varied drastically. One thought surgery would do the trick, another warned it could leave me worse off, and the rest were somewhere in the middle. This situation was both frustrating and, "There for a moment," I remarked as the porter helped me down. The leader motioned towards the operating table. "We just need you over here. This won't take long." So I followed instructions. Meanwhile, he picked up what seemed to me like a very large syringe. It gave me pause. "It's a special kind of syringe," clarified one of the nurses, as they both took a gentle but firm grip on my shoulders. I was cooperative, yet their hold suggested they were prepared for me not to be. "Try to stay relaxed, and this will be over before you know it. You might feel a strong pressure," warned the lead, as the device, which really felt more like the barrel of a gun, was placed between my shoulder blades. "Ready?" I remembered the reason for all this and nodded for him to proceed. Several hours later, having rested from what seemed like a momentous ordeal, I was... After being kicked by a donkey and leaving the hospital in a wheelchair, my journey back to the car was a test of endurance. I had to insist that my wife was already waiting for me when the porter offered help, even though I was on my own. The walk to the car was a battle against fainting. It was only in the late afternoon that I managed to drive home, feeling battered but hopeful. For the first time since the injury, I entered our home without an impending sense of agony. "It's worked," I excitedly told Susie. "I think this is the breakthrough." My optimism grew as I realized the treatment had eased my movements significantly. Simple tasks no longer felt like monumental challenges, and I was overjoyed and hopeful, seeming to have regained my old self for a moment. However, this relief was short-lived. The pain slowly returned, bringing back the despair I thought I had escaped. The journey included another 5 tries at cervical epidural injections, with one causing me to faint but providing a month of relief. The others didn't help at all. It felt like a brief glimpse at a pain-free life was cruelly snatched away, plunging me deeper into despair. I was unaware of the depression settling over me, too caught in my cycle of pain and hopelessness to see it. Isolation became my new norm. The outside world seemed daunting, with just the thought of a simple walk sparking fear of being immobilized by pain far from home. So I remained inside, searching for mental escapes from the physical pain that haunted me. Through this dark time, Susie remained unwaveringly supportive. She was the same compassionate person I married, her resilience and dedication never faltering despite how much I had changed. She stood by me, always ready with practical help, though we skirted around discussing my emotional struggle. Opening up about my feelings was a battle I hadn't learned to fight yet. Instead of facing my problems, I shut down just like I had learned to do since I was young, keeping everything bottled up inside. Clearly, this wasn't good for me, and eventually, all those accumulated negative feelings started to run my life. I was full of anger towards myself and everyone else, quick to get upset, and often fell into long periods of deep, quiet brooding. On top of that, my shattered nerves made me extremely sensitive to any changes in temperature. I constantly needed the house to be warm and became somewhat obsessive about maintaining that warmth. Susie was aware of my need, but she couldn't possibly understand how even a slight drop in temperature could throw me off. One night, as we were watching TV in the living room with the gas fire on, which hardly gave off any heat, I was on the couch since it was better for my back, though I hardly felt the warmth, unlike Susie in her preferred armchair. It had been a draining day for her at work, while I had spent mine quietly fuming over my circumstances. "I'll make some tea," she offered during a commercial break, getting up. "Want one?" "Sure," I barely responded as she stood. "Susie, could you close the door?" I called out as she walked to the kitchen. "Susie!" I had to raise my voice, but she didn't come back. In just a few seconds that she was gone, the draft from the hallway hit me like a frozen wave. I yelled again, out of both panic and frustration. "What's the matter?" she asked when she finally came back. "It's not that cold." "Not cold?" I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself to keep warm, boiling with inner anger. "Susie, you have no clue what I'm dealing with. I'm just stuck here, day in, day out. I've lost my job, my friends, and my bike is just gathering dust. I'm in constant pain, and after seeing countless doctors, no one can help me. So, here I am, loaded up on meds and trying to stay still. This tiny world within these walls is all I have." I waved around dramatically. "And I'm utterly miserable." "You can't lose hope, Brandon," Susie said gently, closing the door before sitting down again. "I don't like hearing you talk like this." "And why not?" I retorted, cutting off her soothing words. "What's there to look forward to, eh? Why should I keep going when I'm this miserable and just dragging you down too? It's not fair on either of us, Susie. I can't go on like this. It's too much." For a brief moment, Susie looked at me, shocked, as if I had revealed a depth of despair she had never seen in me before. From the kitchen, the sound of the kettle clicking off could be heard. "I'll brew us some tea," she offered, before gesturing towards the spot near the hearth. "Please take my seat by the fire from this moment on."